Welcome back to Totally Pointless, everybody. I'm JT,
And I'm TJ.
and we've got some pretty intense material to get into today. TJ, you ready for this?
Yeah, JT, I looked over those sources you sent, and this is going to be a fascinating one.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling, to be honest with you. We're going to be looking at a series of threats made against Canadian political figures in 2024.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, Canadians, they have that reputation, right, of being super polite.
Yeah.
So when multiple serious threats kind of pop up in a single year, well, it makes you wonder what's going on, right? What's pushing people to this point?
That's a great question.
And to keep things focused on the larger trend, we won't be using any names today,
Okay, sounds good.
just the charges and dates and locations.
All right.
So our sources point to this growing sense of discontent towards the government throughout 2024.
Interesting.
Like things are pretty tense.
Uh-huh.
So let's jump into the first case, shall we?
Yeah.
This is back in February. A man from Montreal was charged with uttering threats after allegedly using X, formerly Twitter, to do so.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, does the platform itself tell us anything?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, X is known for its fast-paced exchanges, and often heated ones, too.
Right?
So maybe that environment, contributes to a feeling that threats are somehow less serious,
Right.
even though they're absolutely not.
Yeah, and the RCMP certainly didn't treat it lightly. They brought in their Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, or INSET.
Oh, wow.
That's their specialized unit
Okay.
for, this kind of case.
Uh-huh.
They arrested the man and issued a strong statement saying that they take all threats seriously.
I mean, that right there shows you how seriously law enforcement views these situations.
For sure.
It's not just, words on a screen.
Yeah.
But uttering threats carries real-world consequences no matter what platform you're using.
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, the charges in this case were later dismissed
Really?
after the accused completed an alternative measures program.
That's an interesting twist. So it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, but it also wasn't a full-blown prosecution either.
Yeah.
What kind of message do you think that sends?
Well, it sort of highlights the complexity of these cases,
Yeah.
Alternative measures programs are designed to rehabilitate individuals and address the underlying issues that might have led to the offense.
Right.
So in this specific case, it seems like the justice system saw potential for rehabilitation without needing a criminal conviction.
Interesting. Okay, so let's move on to our next case. This one takes us to Toronto in April, and it involves a completely different platform, TikTok.
Oh, wow.
This time, a man was charged with uttering threats against both the prime minister and the deputy prime minister.
This is where it gets really intriguing. We're seeing a shift not only in the platform, but also in the target and how the threat was made.
Okay.
This wasn't just a quick, tweet or whatever.
Right.
This was a longer rant and captured in a video. And the language used was much more graphic and detailed, like describing acts of violence. It definitely feels like a step up in intensity.
And the court's response seems to reflect that this individual was granted bail, but with very strict conditions. No internet access, no firearms allowed.
Wow. Yeah. They definitely saw this as more than just tough talk.
Right.
These restrictions really highlight how seriously the court viewed the potential for things to escalate.
Yeah.
They clearly perceived a real risk to those who were targeted. It just underlines the point that even though these threats happen online, the consequences can be very real and very serious offline.
Now, our next two cases really highlight how widespread this issue seems to be. We're going from Toronto all the way out west to Alberta.
Wow. Okay.
So in May, a man in Edmonton was charged with uttering threats against the prime minister and the leader of the NDP party. This was in a YouTube video.
Okay.
Then just a month later in June, another man in Calgary was charged with uttering threats against the prime minister and the deputy prime minister on X.
Okay, so the geographical spread is really significant here.
Yeah.
This isn't just something happening in one specific city or region. We're seeing a pattern emerge across the entire country.
Right.
And it's not just the location that's different either. Each case involves a different online platform. We've got Twitter, TikTok, YouTube.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's a particular space online where these threats are more likely to occur, or is it more about this underlying anger and frustration, just finding different outlets?
Right.
And the RCMP actually had some pretty strong words to say about the role of online anonymity and, this belief that virtual actions don't have consequences.
Yeah, makes sense.
A Vox person specifically stated that when virtual words cross the line into criminal activity, the police will thoroughly investigate and hold those responsible accountable.
That's a powerful statement. It really emphasizes that the internet is not a lawless space.
Right.
Law enforcement is getting much better at investigating and prosecuting online threats, and they're making it clear that these actions have very real repercussions.
And it really ties back into those strict bail conditions we saw in the Toronto case.
Absolutely. The courts are not taking these threats lightly. They're recognizing the potential for escalation and imposing consequences to protect the people being targeted.
Okay, we've got one more case to unpack before we start analyzing the bigger picture. This one happened in July and takes us back to Ontario. A man was charged with uttering threats after posting a video online containing threats.
Oh, wow. This case is especially concerning because the threats weren't only directed at politicians, but also at police and security personnel.
Yeah, it's like the scope of the anger is widening.
Exactly.
Like, who else are they going to be mad at?
Right.
And the RCMP issued a statement after this, emphasizing that Canada is not immune to national security threats, citing a heightened security environment for public officials.
That language is chilling.
It really does underscore the gravity of the situation, right? And the very real concerns about potential escalation.
Absolutely. And it raises some important questions about how we as a society respond to these threats and what steps need to be taken to protect our elected officials and the people tasked with protecting them.
All right, so we've laid out 4 distinct cases of threats against Canadian political figures, all happening within just a 6-month period in 2024.
Yeah.
In part 2 of this deep dive, we're going to move beyond the individual cases and start exploring the bigger picture.
Okay, sounds good.
What might these incidents tell us about the state of Canadian society?
Hmm.
Are they isolated incidents or symptoms of a larger, more concerning trend? Stay tuned because we're about to get into the really fascinating stuff.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
We're back for part 2 of our deep dive into this unsettling trend of threats against Canadian political figures. We've covered a lot of ground, but now I'm curious, TJ, what are the long-term consequences of all this? Does it actually impact how Canadians engage in politics?
That's the million-dollar question, JT, and it's one we need to take very seriously. A healthy democracy relies on open and honest debate. But when fear and intimidation creep in, it can poison the well, so to speak.
I can see that. People might be less willing to speak their minds, especially if they hold unpopular opinions, for fear of becoming a target themselves.
Exactly. It creates a chilling effect where people self-censor, avoiding certain topics or watering down their views. And when that happens, it's not just individuals who suffer, it's our democracy as a whole. We end up with a distorted public discourse where only the most extreme voices feel comfortable speaking out.
So these threats, even if they never lead to actual violence, can still do real damage to our political system. It's like a virus that weakens our democratic immune system.
That's a good way to put it, JT. And it can create a vicious cycle. As trust in institutions erodes, people feel even more disillusioned and alienated, which can in turn lead to further anger and extremism.
So what can we do to break this cycle? Is it even possible to restore a sense of civility and respect to our political discourse, especially in this hyper-polarized online world?
It's a tough challenge, but I don't think it's hopeless. We need to start by fostering a culture of tolerance, both online and offline. We need to encourage civil discourse where people can disagree respectfully without resorting to personal attacks or threats.
Easier said than done, right? But how do we actually make that happen?
It's about promoting media literacy, critical thinking skills, and empathy. We need to teach people how to evaluate information critically, to recognize the difference between legitimate arguments and harmful rhetoric, and to understand the impact of their words on others. It's about fostering a sense of shared humanity, even across political divides.
It sounds like a massive undertaking, but it feels essential, especially given what we've learned in this deep dive.
It is essential, JT. Democracy is a fragile thing, and it requires our constant vigilance and effort to protect it. We need to be proactive in countering the forces that threaten to undermine it.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they do in their own lives to make a difference?
It starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own words and actions, both online and offline. Be mindful of the language you use, even in the heat of an argument. Challenge those who resort to personal attacks or hateful rhetoric. Engage in respectful dialogue, even with those you disagree with.
It sounds simple, but I think you're right. It's about making a conscious choice to be part of the solution, not the problem. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us do that, we can start to shift the tide.
I believe we can, JT. Remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect. Don't underestimate the power of your own voice.
Well said. This has been a sobering, but ultimately, I think, a hopeful conversation. We've identified a serious problem, but we've also explored some potential solutions. It's a call to action for all of us to be more mindful, more engaged, and more committed to protecting our democracy.
I couldn't agree more, JT. It's a reminder that democracy is a precious and fragile thing, and it's up to all of us to safeguard it.
And on that note, we'd like to encourage all of you listening to continue the conversation. Talk to your friends, family, and colleagues about what you've learned today. Share your thoughts and perspectives online. Let's keep this important dialogue going.
And remember, every voice matters. Even small actions can make a difference in shaping a more positive and productive future for our country.
That's it for this deep dive into a concerning trend in Canada. As always, thanks for joining us on Totally Pointless. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.